And 1 Samuel chapter 9. Now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah, the son of a Benjamite, a mighty man of valor. He had a son whose name was Saul, a choice and handsome man, and there was not a more handsome person than he among the sons of Israel. From his shoulders and up he was taller than any of the people. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. So Kish said to his son Saul, "Take now with you one of the servants, and arise, go search for the donkeys." He passed through the hill country of Ephraim, and passed through the land of Shalishah, but they did not find them. Then they passed through the land of Shalim, but they were not there. Then he passed through the land of the Benjamites, but they did not find them. When they came to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant who was with him, "Come and let us return, or else my father will cease to be concerned about the donkeys and will become anxious for us." He said to him, "Behold now, there is a man of God in this city, and the man is held in honor. All that he says surely comes true. Now let us go there. Perhaps he can tell us about our journey on which we have set out." Then Saul said to his servant, "But behold, if we go, what shall we bring the man? For the bread is gone from our sack, and there is no present to bring to the man of God. What do we have?" The servant answered Saul and said, "Behold, I have in my hand a fourth of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God, and he will tell us our way. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he used to say, 'Come and let us go to the seer,' for he who is called a prophet now was formerly called a seer." Then Saul said to his servant, "Well said, come, let us go." So they went to the city where the man of God was. As they went up the slope to the city, they found young women going out to draw water and said to them, "Is the seer here?" They answered them and said, "He is. See, he is ahead of you. Hurry now, for he has come into the city today, for the people have a sacrifice on the high place today. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited to eat will eat. Now, therefore, go up, for you will find him at once." So they went up to the city. And as they came into the city, behold, Samuel was coming out toward them to go up to the high place. Now a day before Saul's coming, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel, saying, "About this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel, and he will deliver my people from the hand of the Philistines. For I have regarded my people, because their cry has come to me." When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said to him, "Behold, the man of whom I spoke to you, this one shall rule over my people." Then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, "Please tell me where the seer's house is." Samuel answered Saul and said, "I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, for you shall eat with me today, and in the morning I will let you go and will tell you all that is on your mind. As for the donkeys which were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found. And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's household?" Saul replied, "Am I not a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? And my family the least of all the families of the tribes of Benjamin? Why then do you speak to me in this way?" Then Samuel took Saul and his servant and brought them into the hall and gave them a place at the head of those who were invited, who were about 30 men. Samuel said to the cook, "Bring the portion that I gave you, concerning which I said to you, set it aside." Then the cook took up the leg with which was on it, and with what was on it, and set it before Saul. And Samuel said, "Here is what has been reserved. Set it before you and eat, because it has been kept for you until the appointed time, since I said I have invited the people." So Saul ate with Samuel that day. When they came down from the high place into the city, Samuel spoke with Saul on the roof. And they arose early, and at daybreak Samuel called to Saul on the roof, saying, "Get up, that I may send you away." So Saul arose, and both he and Samuel went out into the street. As they were going down to the edge of the city, Samuel said to Saul, "Say to the servant that he might go ahead of us and pass on. But you remain standing now, that I may proclaim the word of God to you." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
One of my favorite questions to ask and to answer is the question, so how did you two meet? For my wife and I, the short answer is we met at Chick-fil-A. But the long story is even better. Rebecca worked there with her sister, and she told her one day, I've got a guy that I want to introduce you to. Well, the guy wasn't me. The guy was my brother. So one day they meet for the first time, and I was actually working that same day. I didn't know they were playing matchmaker or anything like that. And I was walking past, and her sister said, oh, yeah, that's his brother, Tyler. And I went, hi, kind of clueless that my life was about to change forever. Well, the next day, we worked a shift together, and we talked about chicken sandwiches. We talked about college, talked about family, talked about life. We talked about God. And I kid you not, after knowing each other for about 6 hours, she went home that night and told her mom, I met the man I'm going to marry. Now, if only she had told me, we'd have got married a lot sooner if that had been the case. Now, if you think that is an awesome story, and I do, imagine asking King Saul and the prophet Samuel, so how did you two meet? Saul would say, I have the wildest story to tell you. And that's the story that we have in our passage today. 1 Samuel 9 is all about Saul's search. If you noticed in the reading, this chapter is better than an Agatha Christie novel. It has twists and turns and odd little details. And there's parts in the story that make you sort of scratch your head and say, wait a minute, where's this going? What does that have to do with anything? And while you're making your way through it, you find yourself wondering, what's happening? And like me that day at Chick-fil-A, Saul, for most of the story, has no idea his life is about to change forever. And once we get to the end of the story, we realize that this chapter is not simply about Saul's search for donkeys. It's about God's search for a king. That God finds Israel, their first king, through the ups and downs of life. See, our God is so powerful and our God is so creative that God can not only do his work through grand things like plagues, he can also do his work through plain things like lost donkeys and random conversations. Some of you this morning, you feel like your life is dull, routine. Your life is filled with paying bills and changing diapers and grading papers and driving to work, and sometimes you may even wonder where God is. But my friends, I want to remind you this morning that if God is not in the spotlight right now, I promise you, he is in the shadows. Because behind our very ordinary life, there is an extraordinary God. And he is working through some of the most mundane things that we don't even imagine. And through 1 Samuel chapter 9, the Lord will remind all of us that man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. He was doing it for Saul, he was doing it for Samuel, and I have no doubt he is doing it for you. What do I mean? Well, let's look at this chapter and this story together. The curtain lifts on verse 1, and we're introduced to a new character. Notice chapter 9, verse 1 begins, now there was a man. That should sound familiar if you've been here with the series. Chapter 9, verse 1 begins the same way as chapter 1, verse 1. The book started, now there was a man of Ramathaim-Zophim. Now we have again, now there was a man. It's the author's way of saying, pay attention. This story sounds familiar, but it's going to go in an unfamiliar direction. We left off last week with Israel asking for a king, and so we're wondering, where's this king going to come from? and we meet this man named Kish. If you notice, he has a very impressive genealogy. He has a very impressive reputation, a man of valor. But even more, this man Kish has an impressive son. Verse 2 describes Saul as being choice and handsome. I love how one commentator put it. This is what he said. What a good-looking fellow this Saul must have been. People would have voted him Mr. Israel had there been such a contest. It's a real shame they didn't have basketball at Gibeah High School, because Saul would have been the starting center. This guy Saul, he has it all. He's got a great family. He's got great looks. He's got great height. He is impressive. If anyone in Israel is a king that can stand down the nations, if anyone is the kind of king who can sort of intimidate others, it's this guy. Or we'll see. The journey begins in verse 3. Now the donkeys of Kish were lost. I'll give you a little Bible reading tip. In stories, the smallest sentences often carry the biggest meaning. And this is one of those cases. The donkeys of Kish were lost. Is this a good thing? Certainly not. It's like a farmer losing his tractor. What on earth? This is a terrible thing. And yet, through this terrible thing that happens, we're about to embark on one of the most remarkable events in the history of Israel. And it starts in the most mundane way. It's almost like if I told you a story and said, once upon a time, Bob lost his keys. One thing led to another, and Bob became president of the United States. How did that happen? That phrase, one thing led to another, now watch this, in literature that's called lazy writing. But in theology, that's called providence. That there is a God at work through random things, even bad things, like lost donkeys. Saul and his servant begin to search. Ephraim, no donkeys. Shalashah, no donkeys. Sha'alem, no donkeys. Land of the Benjamites, no donkeys. They go to Zuph, no donkeys. Everywhere they look, they can't find them. Which, by the way, don't miss the irony of this. You remember last week Israel said, we want a king. And God said, fine, you can have a king. And in chapter 8, verse 16, God says, when you get a king like the nations, he will, quote, take your donkeys. And now we meet Saul, who can't even find his donkeys. Maybe looks aren't everything. He's impressive, but he's not finding these donkeys. Nevertheless, despite all their work, they continue to look. In verse 5, he wants to give up. He says, come and let us return, or else my father will cease to be concerned about the donkeys and will become anxious for us. Now, there's some good things about Saul. I like this. Of all the father-son stories we've seen so far in the book, this is the best one. He's actually honoring his father. He's caring about his father. And yet we find that just so soon, he's already wanting to give up and to quit. Maybe he doesn't quite have that decisive spirit of a good leader. We're going to accomplish the mission. And so the servant has to give him a pep talk. He says, hey, verse 6, don't you know there's a man of God in the next city? A prophet, a man of God that we can go to. Maybe he can tell us. Now, we know who this is. But at this point in the story, they don't know who this is. Which is actually kind of telling. Because think about it. Again, Saul is impressive, but he's kind of clueless. If there was one celebrity in Israel, guess who it was? Samuel. He's been going town to town year after year. He's been the prophet. He's been the priest. He's been the judge. If anybody would be known in the land, it was Samuel, but they don't even know him by name. They just go, yeah, I think there's a man of God. The servant urges him to go see him. But Saul points out, we've got a problem. You can't go to a man of God without an honorarium. There's no food in our bag. There's no bread left. We have nothing to give him. It seems like, this was the best solution. This was the key. This was the thing. The man of God, he can tell us. He has insights. He has knowledge. But alas, we don't have anything. And just when you think the story will fall apart, verse 8, the servant answered Saul again and said, behold. Now, I love that word. In fact, I think it should be translated sometimes, believe it or not. You ever tell a story, lo and behold? There's something amazing coming after that. That's what he says here. Behold, I have found a quarter shekel. They searched all the bags, no bread, no food, we have nothing. And the servant went, oh, where did this come from? I got $20. We got just enough to be able to do it. So it seems like the whole story is going to fall apart, but all of a sudden they get the right thing they need at the right time. You ever have that happen in your life? You think to yourself, man, nobody cares about me, nobody loves me, nobody reaches out to me, and then all of a sudden you get a text message from friends, I was just thinking about you. And you go, wow. You owe a bill for $142, and next thing you know, you get a refund for $142. Where did that come from? We have just what you need at just the right time, and here they discovered that. It's interesting to note that the servant, by the one, is the one making all these ideas. In fact, I think the servant is a more decisive leader than Saul is at this point. He's got all the right ideas. He's the guy pushing him to do this. So they tell them, let's move on. So they begin to make their way. In verse 11, they come to the ancient Near Eastern water cooler. It says, as they went up the slope to the city, they found young women going out to draw water and said to them, is the seer here? Now, if you know your Bible, this is where you should sit up and lean in. Because really important stuff happens with women at wells. Think of Isaac. Think of Jacob. Think of Moses. Think of Jesus. Really significant things happen in seemingly insignificant places. These ladies are just doing their chores, just getting their water. See, some of you find yourself going through life and not wanting to, what you're doing and going through. You think, man, I just hate my cubicle. I hate what it stands for. I don't like sitting in this small thing. But you never know how that cubicle might be the thing that God used to change someone's life. That some conversation happens right there. And these women were just going about what they know. They ask about the seer or the prophet, and so the women answer them. Notice in verses 12 and 13. And they give them an answer. He is here. See, he is ahead of you. Now, I have to tell you something really funny. I laughed at this all week long. The answer these women give in 12 and 13 is a little bit repetitive and kind of disjointed. It's not as obvious in English, but they kind of seem like they're fumbling their words, all right? And I was reading, and one rabbi said, the reason they're fumbling their words is because when Saul walked up, he was so handsome. I don't know if that's true, but I would love for it to be true because, I mean, that's how Rebecca was at Chick-fil-A when she saw me. Just, so, yeah. I don't know for sure, but they do point him in a direction. Notice they say there is a sacrifice taking place. In Israel, the place of worship, Shiloh's been destroyed. The ark has been moved. In fact, their religion's kind of defunct at this point. Samuel at this point is like an interim pastor. He's kind of going from city to city, holding little services, leading some of the things. Things aren't quite established as they should be. So he's coming back home, and they're waiting for him to come to lead the sacrifice, to lead the meal, to bless it, and so forth. And notice how the women stress, he is ahead of you. Hurry. He's in the city today. There's a sacrifice today. So they're pointing him. Yeah, you've come to the right place. You've come at the right time. You're right here. Just go right in. By the way, there's another wonderful little play on words here. Notice, even in the English, you can see it. It says in verse 11, as they went up. And the women say to him in verse 13 that he should go up. And then in verse 14, it says, so they went up. You see what's happening to Saul? without even realize it, he is ascending to the throne. And he doesn't even know what's happening. He's just going about, and he is right where he needs to be, going up and up and up and up and up. Saul's search then takes them into the city. And just before we go any further, the author then in 15 and 16 gives us a flashback. You know, sometimes in movies or TV shows, the color change or something. That's what's happening here, 15. Now, a day before Saul's coming, right, so we go back in time, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel, saying, about this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Now, do you see the next time stamp there? Verse 15. Now, a day before, verse 16, about this time tomorrow. Have you picked up on the fact yet that the timing in this story is incredible? Think about it. The donkeys wandered off 3 days ago. And yet, that's when they left out on their journey. And as they're coming, God speaks to Samuel. They arrive. The women just happen to be there the day that Samuel comes home. And everything, it seems like it's lining up. It's like this is happening in the fullness of time. Something is taking place. God spoke to Samuel and told him that a man was coming. He says in verse 16, he shall be prince over my people. Some of your translations say captain, some say ruler, but I don't think any of them say king. It's like God's avoiding the word on purpose. Because remember, this is not God's choice for a king. He's giving the people what they want. So he says, I'll give them a designee. I'll put someone in place. We will anoint someone to start this monarchy thing. But he's not the king that I want. He's the king that the people want. And God is giving that to them. So he walks up, and it's as if God whispers into his ear and says to him, now that's the guy. He's the one that will rule over my people. And then notice what he says. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. You say, wait a minute. Is God pro-king or anti-king? Right, I'm so confused by this. It's like God says, don't do it, and then he's the one that establishes to do it. What is happening here? I think the answer is neither. I think God is pro his people. God is pro-compassion. God is pro-mercy. On the one hand, yeah, the king is a kind of judgment. He says, you rejected me. God says, you rejected me as king, so fine, you can have it. You can have what you want. You can have a king like unto the nations. And so in one sense, it was an act of judgment, but at the same time, God is so merciful that this act of judgment becomes the means by which he will bring deliverance. He actually will turn it around for good. It is both God's punishment and God's provision for their salvation. See, the same event in your life can both be a disaster and an act of deliverance. If you don't believe me, just look at the gospel. The death of Jesus Christ is the greatest act of sin in all of human history. Man killed God in the flesh. And yet the cross of Jesus Christ is also the greatest act of mercy and grace in human history. Same event, same moment. Like Israel, you and I rejected God. We've sinned against him. And yet in our sin and our brokenness, humanity cries out, recognizing we've come up short. Recognizing, like these candidates, that they've sinned before God. And they need God to deliver them. That they can't save themselves. And so the cross of Jesus Christ is the point at which God's punishment for sin takes place, but it's also God's provision for sin. The place where he brings salvation. And he does what it takes in this moment to bring about the forgiveness of sins. My friends, do you know that? Do you know the forgiveness of sins? Do you understand the glory of the cross, that it is both extremely ugly because of our sin and yet is extremely beautiful because it's the place of our redemption? This is why we glory in the cross, because it shows the worst in us, but it shows the best in God. And by giving them a king, It shows the worst in Israel, but it's going to show the best in God because he will deliver them. Just when we think this story can't get any more random, notice verse 18. Then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, "Please tell me where the seer's house is." And Samuel answered and said, "I am the seer." Now, what are the odds? I don't know how big Ramah was, but imagine walking up to the exact right guy on the exact right day at the exact right time, and he's the first person you meet. Wow, what a coincidence. You ever had a moment like that in your life? It's interesting to me here that Saul, in a way, he's not really in control of the situation. I heard one preacher describe it. He said, it's almost like Saul is a pinball. You ever play pinball? Bing, 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 right? You ever feel sometimes like life is just kind of bouncing you around? Kind of hit you on this side and hit you on that side and all over the place? Stuff is happening, maybe good stuff, maybe bad stuff, but it doesn't feel like you're really in control. Well, guess what? It's because you're not in control. But there is someone who is in control. Don't misunderstand me. Yes, we make choices. Yes, we have free moral agency. Yes, bad things happen like losing donkeys, but we're not the ones ultimately writing the story. And the sovereign God of the universe allows us to do what we want while he also accomplishes what he wants. So Samuel invites Saul to dinner. He says in verse 20, "As for your donkeys, which were lost 3 days ago, they have been found." Well, how did he know that? Amazing. Well, it proves he is the seer. He is the prophet. He is the one they're looking for. He has divine insight into what's going on. Then at the end of the invitation to dinner, notice in verse 20, at the very end, he asks two questions. "And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's household?" Now, that seems like an odd question. You say, what is he talking about there? Basically, Samuel sees Saul, says, "Your donkeys have been found, and by the way, I have a message to you. Son, you've just hit the Jerusalem jackpot. Everything you desire is about to come to you. Honor is coming to you. Wealth is coming to you. Power is coming to you. Fame is coming to you. It's all coming your direction. It's all coming your way." And Saul's not too sure about this. He responds in verse 21 with some humility. Some scholars think this is false humility. Others think it's true. I don't really know. But either way, he finds himself somewhat reluctant about taking this on. Am I not a Benjamite of the smallest tribe? But Samuel doubles down saying, no, you are the person. The Lord has told me you are the one. So he invites him to eat. He goes to this banquet hall. Notice when they bring him in, they don't go, "Hey, we got 2 more. Y'all get some chairs out of the back and some folding chairs or whatever." They take Saul and his servant to the head of the table. They give him the best. This is the VIP red carpet treatment. They put him at the head, and there's 30 people sitting around the table waiting to have this meal. And Saul still doesn't know what's going on. And then notice at the end of verse 24 it says, "So Saul ate with Samuel that day." Now remember what I said earlier? That many times in stories, the smallest sentences contain the biggest significance. So Saul ate with Samuel that day. Saul is not only given the best seat in the house, but did you notice he's also given the best portion of the food? Did you notice in the reading earlier, verses 23 and 24, there's all this description about this hunk of meat. Is it a thigh? Is it a leg? Samuel told the cook, "You put it over here and you cook it and you keep it, and then I'm going to ask you to give it to you, and when you bring it to me, I'm going to give it to you, and this is the portion," right? It goes out of its way to talk about this meat. Why is that significant? Because this portion of meat, according to Exodus 29, this was the portion of meat that was only to be given to the priests and their families. Samuel doesn't share this meat with Joel and Abijah. He doesn't share it with his worthless sons. Instead, he shares it with Saul. Samuel is treating Saul as if he's his own son. He is indicating that this leadership is being passed from me to you. By bringing him in, he is giving to him the reins of leadership. And through this inauguration type meal, he's showing the people in the room something is about to happen. You're watching this unfold, and with a very simple meal, we see that Saul is the one who was chosen. Which is interesting because verse 2 says that he was a choice man. The food was chosen, the man was chosen, everything was chosen to bring it to that moment. And then notice the last line of that, the last phrase at verse 24. So Saul ate with Samuel when? That day. I know I hinted at this earlier, but can you stop and appreciate the fact that it's pointing out that day? Do you understand how many things had to happen for this to happen when it did? When the donkeys left, they just happened to leave 3 days earlier. They just happened to go in a certain direction. They just happened to be close to where the seer was. When all is lost, they just happened to find a quarter shekel. They walk in, they go to the slope, and the women happen to know where the prophet lives. They walk in the town, and they just happen, the first person they talk to is Samuel. It just so happens that there's actually a giant banquet that's just been prepared, and the time and effort that went into that. And they just so happen to have things ready for them to come in and sit and eat. Some people would hear that and say, wow, what good luck. My friend, there's no such thing as good luck. What men call coincidence, God calls providence. Albert Einstein once said, coincidence is simply God's way of remaining anonymous. It's as if somebody's writing the story. And it's not Samuel writing the story. It's not Saul writing the story. But somebody is writing the story. Like pearls in a necklace, all these random events that taken by themselves maybe don't mean much, but when strung together, we start to see how the picture is formed. Spurgeon once said that even big doors swing on little hinges. So too the big plans of God swing on the small providences of our life. That the work of God unfolds for us in ways we often don't expect, through people we don't often expect, and in ways and times we don't expect. See, sometimes I think we read the Bible and we get the wrong impression. We see the impressive moments. We see the grand moments. We see the big moments, and we think to ourselves, well, I want God to show himself to me in that way. Listen, sometimes, occasionally, God works through miracles, but frequently he works through circumstances. Small miracles of random, but not actually random. If some of you are old enough, you know, years ago, this is in the 90s, a TV show called Seinfeld. People used to love Seinfeld when it first came out. And they would talk about how it was this, postmodern homage to the randomness of life. Right? Because everything in the show is kind of random, and, who knew that was going to happen? What they don't stop and talk about is the fact that for all this randomness to happen, the show had like 25 writers. It wasn't random. So somebody wrote that story. Somebody put it together in a way to bring about what needed to happen. And my friends, God is doing the same thing for Saul, and God is doing the same thing for us. Maybe your life right now doesn't look like the book of Exodus. No plagues, no fire, no clouds. Maybe your life looks like the book of Esther, where the name of God never appears. And there's just stuff happening, conversations, And yet through it all, God is at work. See, like Saul, we're going through life and we have this limited understanding. We're just doing the next thing in front of us and the next thing in front of us, and sometimes we're not sure where we're headed. We're kind of clueless about what's going on. We might even be foolish in some of the things that we do. But you know, one of the greatest comforts that God's taught me over the years is that God's sovereignty is bigger than my stupidity. I don't know if you find that comforting, but I do. Because sometimes I just don't know. But I have a God who does know. That's why Jesus says things like, do not worry about your life, as to what you will eat or what you will drink or what you will wear. Do you not know that your Heavenly Father knows you need these things? Look at the birds of the air. Look at the flowers of the field. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. You just be faithful, seek the kingdom in the thing that you have right now. And sometimes you say, Lord, I don't understand, and I don't know where it's going, but I trust that you do. Ephesians 1:11 says that God works all things after the counsel of his will. There is an inevitable mystery in that. But my friends, as I heard a pastor recently say, God's providence is written in invisible ink. There's a message and a meaning as we go through life, even if we don't see it. And one day it will be revealed. And we will see that God was lovingly and wisely providing what we needed, when we needed, through people and things that we needed, even through bad stuff beyond our control. Some of you college students, you're driving yourself crazy because you think that you have to have your whole life figured out by the age of 22. And if you don't, you feel like you're a failure. Can I speak for the older people in the room to you college students? Yes, some people confidently step into God's will. Most of us stumble into it. We trip into it. We're just faithful with what we don't have a whole roadmap of everything. We just seek first his kingdom. We do what he's put in front of us. Even though life doesn't always seem to go like we think or know, God is working in and around and through. I don't think I've ever told this story, well, except in the first service. I don't think I've ever told this story to the church before. I've been at the church now for 25, 26 years. I've been pastoring now for the past 16. Before that, I was a staff member. 20 years ago, my wife and I seriously thought about moving away. We flew out to Texas. I knew that God had called me to be a pastor, and I was working off of that. I should go to seminary, so I flew out to Texas. And we spent a week there looking at the campus, the seminary. We applied for jobs. We did all the things that you would do going to a new town, a new city. And I vividly remember sitting in a rental car in a parking lot at an apartment complex. And we had a piece of paper, an application completely filled out, and a deposit check for $1,000. All it needed was our signature. And we sat there, and we looked at each other and went, I don't know. So she prayed, and I prayed, and we talked, and we prayed, and we talked, and we prayed, and we sat there for, I don't know, probably a good 2 hours. And we did not know what was next and what was going. But by the end of the conversation, we said, you know what, I just don't have peace about this. So we ripped up the check, flew home. That flight was one of the most discouraging flights I've ever been on. I mean, the flight was fine, but I was discouraged. I thought, God, what are you doing? I thought you wanted to be a pastor. I thought you wanted to go to seminary. God, I thought you were going to open these doors. We've applied for jobs and nothing's opened up. What on earth are you doing? Fast forward a few years. You know where this story's going. But fast forward a few years, and I was finishing seminary locally, and the former pastor left, and I felt like, okay, and I remember giving my resume to the search committee. And I went home and I told my wife, I said, I gave my resume. I said, it's in the Lord's hands. And my wife looked at me that night and she said, well, it's a good thing we're not in Texas. Man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. He did it for Saul. He's done it for me. And I promise he's doing it for you. you can trust him.